This stuff is documented in other places. It's relatively easy to find. We're also not here to tell you how to write a standard because there really is no one right way to do it. And probably the most important thing here is that if you want to get back a bunch of information on how the IETF works, there is a YouTube channel with all sorts of presentations on it that you can go and review. All right, so what is the IETF? Well, the first thing that I think is important is to understand why it is that we're here. The most important thing that you'll find is that people are really involved in understanding how they can write technical documents that influence the way that people use the internet. And that could be used in a very general term. It could be an end user. It could be a service provider who's using a protocol to provide a service. It could be some type of content provider who's actually offering up the content. But the goal here is to basically make the internet work better. So what exactly is the IETF and how do we make things work better? Well, we are a standards development organization. I will say, though, that I've been to several other standards organizations and we don't look alike. We're kind of like the third cousin removed as far as that goes. We have no membership. In fact, the way you participate in the IETF is simply by joining a mailing list. And that's your choice. Nobody makes you do it. We don't vote. You will hear lots of humming, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But there is no formal voting process. Everything is run by rough consensus. One of the key things here is that there really is no government role in what the IETF does. Many other standards organizations have some kind of either liaison with governments or direct government interactions. So if you've been to something like the ITU and you've had to deal with like UN government processes and things like that, you won't find that here at all. From a use perspective, all the standards that the IETF develops are voluntary. We don't mandate that anybody uses them. We have no vehicle to make people use these standards. What drives our standards is the fact that markets are actually adopting these standards and deploying them. And you get a nice cycle of interactions where a standard gets written, somebody implements it, somebody deploys it, somebody uses it, and then we get feedback that says, oh, well, this protocol is great except for, and we go through that iteration again. And so by that market-driven adoption model, we get very strong standards because they're being exercised in ways that people want to use them. Our standards are focused on internet technologies. You won't find us writing standards on bitcoins. You won't find us writing standards on how an Ethernet segment's supposed to work. We really focused on the internet layer, so essentially from layer 3 up to the applications. And that actually is also the model that we use from a development perspective. We don't dictate from on high that a certain standard has to be written. This is really participant-driven development, very bottoms up. The organization of the IETF, from a technical perspective, if you're here for technical reasons, you're going to be probably tied to a couple of these different areas. These areas are really meant to group common or related working groups together, both from a technology exchange perspective, but also from a management perspective. IETF areas have area directors that oversee them, so they have to have some area of expertise, and they're typically tied to the working group technologies being developed within their area. I will say that these areas have changed over time, so just because we have them on a slide now doesn't mean that a specific area will be here when you come back in a year or two. It's very much driven by what working groups are active and being and have active participation in. Now, back to the humming question. So the IETF is really driven by consensus, and if you go back and look at some of the old documentation, the exact mantra that originated is something about rejecting kings, presidents, and voting. We want to see rough consensus and running code. A lot of people here are hardcore engineers, and they don't necessarily believe in somebody's personal opinion on something, but if you can show them that something works via running code, it's something tangible that they can assess and make a judgment on. The rough consensus is really more of a case of being able to say that all issues that have been raised have been addressed. It doesn't necessarily mean that those issues have to be accommodated. They can be acknowledged and they can be stated as, yes, we understand that's a limitation, but there's really nothing we can do without really holding things back. What that means is that all the dissenting opinions get heard, but a dissenting voice cannot hold up a proposed standard forever, right? If people recognize that the issue raised is potentially an issue for somebody, but everybody else is happy with what's going on, then the rough consensus is going to win out in the end. So what really comes up into play here is how do we actually judge consensus? So we could hold a vote and find out what's going on, but that doesn't necessarily resonate well with people. If we really want to judge what's going on in a room, then one of the common ways to do it is you'll hear a working group chair ask for a hum. And it's not a way of actually stating equivocally that all issues have been addressed. It's more of a comparison of volume to see where the working group lies on the spectrum between completely acceptable and completely unacceptable. And it's really just, it's a rough measurement, right? Instead of saying, oh, well, the wind's blowing out of the northeast at seven knots, you're going to stick a wet finger in the air and go, oh, yeah, it's kind of blowing that way. And that's what the humming is for. So don't be surprised when you see a work group chair get up and say, okay, I'm going to take a hum. Here's the question. Then you hear a whole bunch of people that sound like they're about to start breaking into song. When that happens, typically the chair of that session is responsible for judging that consensus. And I say session chair not because it's going to be a work group chair. It could be an area director. It could be somebody else who has been delegated the responsibility of doing it, depending on what the situation is. But the person actually calling it is the one who's responsible for judging it. When you're in a work group session, even if you take a hum in a room during a meeting like this, that still isn't a completely acceptable judgment of consensus. We don't necessarily expect everyone to show up for a meeting face to face, so we have to be able to judge consensus of all the participants of the working group. And so that's typically going to be done on a mailing list. So if you're in a session this week and someone asks for a hum, what you will typically see is a mailing list message from the chair that says, okay, we took a hum in the room, and now we want to judge that consensus on the mailing list because we want to make sure that we're accommodating all the participants in the working group, not just the ones who are able to make it to that face-to-face meeting. And if you want to read about all the gory details of what is and isn't consensus, then I highly recommend Pete Resnick's RFC 7282. Pete spent a lot of time and has a very good background in judging consensus and how it should be done in the IETF context. With that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about IETF culture. Because this is a self-selected group of people, you'll find that most of them are very passionate, very smart, and very vocal about their opinions. Sometimes that can be a little scary because you're not necessarily sure why two people are standing in a hallway nearly yelling at each other, but then an hour later you see them in a bar having a beer together. People like to have these technical discussions, and sometimes those discussions can get rather heated. It's not a personal thing, it's a technical argument thing, and people like to have those technical discussions because technical excellence is one of those things that people value very highly here. If you can come in with very articulate technical arguments for a particular approach, then you will find traction in what you're trying to do. The other thing that makes us relatively different from other standards organizations is you don't see people running around in three-piece suits. Well, okay, you see one person running around in a three-piece suit, but I don't think he's here this week. Okay. T-shirts are great. You can get one down at the registration desk if you haven't gotten one already. And the other thing about being an informal organization like that is that a lot of people that are here have worked together for years or decades. And so don't be scared away by very intense conversations between people, feel free to inject your comments. Just recognize that some of the people who are having these comments have known each other for 20 or 30 years, and they kind of talk in a slightly different way than you would if you were just having a normal technical discussion. The other thing that I want to warn you about, you'll see a lot of acronyms this week. My recommendation is don't worry about them. There's a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of different moving parts. But as someone who's sitting in the Newcomers tutorial, I think the key thing for you to focus on are the technical areas that you're interested in. You'll learn these details as you go along and continue to participate. Don't let them overwhelm you as you go through this week. Give you an idea of some of these. So the Internet Engineering Steering Group, IESG, this is the group of people who basically oversee the technical work. The Internet Architecture Board is more of an oversight organization. The IRTF is a related organization that does more researchy type things. And then we've got some more of the non-technical administrative things that go on here, like the IASA and the IAD and the IAOC. Those are more, how do we run the organization as opposed to how do we deal with the technical sides of the world. So I kind of covered some of this stuff, but I think the key thing here is to recognize that there are different groups of people who are responsible for the organization and the management of the IETF. As you participate and you get more involved, you'll start interacting more with these people in some form or fashion. But for now, know who they are if you need to, but really focus on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miriam. She's going to talk about what an IETF week looks like in a nutshell.
Thanks, Brian. Are there any questions so far? Is this everything kind of clear? Yeah, do you want to have a question? Sure.
Thanks, Brian. I don't know if I'm going to have the opportunity to repeat the question at the end, or I maybe forgot. It's just maybe it's not for this session, but first of all, my name is Saul. I'm from the International Civil Aviation Organization, and we're in the process of standardizing more the use of the internet for aviation. But just a question, you said that the standards of IETF, they are not mandatory. They're all by consensus, they are not mandatory. When you create a standard, it's because you need people to use for any reason. I don't know, interoperability of systems or something. But if you create a standard, you do not mandate the standard. What is the point to have a standard and not allow people just to do whatever they want?
So if I were to repeat your question, it's basically, how do these standards get used if we're not mandating them?
Correct. I guess that's the main focus.
Okay. So because these are voluntary standards, what you actually find is you get a very interesting group of people involved in a particular area. And it's not necessarily somebody who's just a software developer or just a network service provider or just a security researcher. It's typically going to be a spectrum of people who have a problem, who have started to hash through what that solution might have to solve. And once you get a diverse group of people that are working on that standard, it's almost in their best interest to try and use it once it's actually been written down in some form. So if I go back to the running code part of rough consensus and running code, a lot of the time what you'll find is that groups of people will get together before they ever write a document and hash together an idea, implement it, test it, and if it actually solves their problem, then they'll come in and say, oh, this is how we dealt with this. Let's see if we can reach consensus on how it should be standardized. And if that occurs, then you start seeing more adoption from implementers and then from operators who are then making that service available to users. A good example that has started in the last few years is yesterday and today there's what's called the IETF Hackathon. Groups of people get together and actually work on specific pieces of code that are either related to emerging standards or even problems that they haven't really written a standard for, but they have an idea. And so by pulling that code together, it kind of gives people a basis to go off and experiment and then come back and say, yeah, that experiment worked, or no, that didn't work, and it's kind of that iterative process. So it's it's because you get interested groups of people working together from diverse organizations that really make these successful protocols. Does that answer your question? But if not, feel free to grab me after the session, and I can talk for who knows how long.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, it's basically if people, only once people start using a protocol, it becomes slowly a standard. So it's community-driven or market-driven. It's not mandated from the top, which is different than in other standards organizations. You're right. Now, let's get back to this. Some practical information about the IETF week. There are a lot of different types of events and sessions and meetings organized by the IETF organization, but there are some side meetings as well. Let's just start here. There are about 130 different working groups grouped into these 7 areas that Brian just showed you on an earlier slides. There are also sessions, they're called Birds of a Feather session, and I don't know if you're all familiar with this term. It took me a while at the beginning to figure out why it's called the Birds of a Feather. I don't know if it's an American thing, but it's basically a group of like-minded people, or people have a similar interest, like birds, they look similar, kind of same feather. I don't know where this comes from. But that's what we call a BOF, a Birds of a Feather session, and that's often like a pre-working group, kind of a meeting before a working group actually gets formalized. We'll get to that process. There are also a number of these Internet Research Task Force sessions. Like as Brian mentioned, there's a separate organization called the IRTF. They have research groups instead of working groups. Not all of them meet here during the week, but you see on the agenda something that has an RG at the back. It's kind of part of the IRTF, like a research group instead of a working group. And they're also kind of area-wide sessions. They're usually a good way to kind of get an overview of what an area is currently working on and not diving into every very specific documents. There's a plenary this week on Wednesday. Usually, this week's only one plenary, so it's kind of a mix of an update of some administrative and oversight kind of issues, but also, as always, a technical presentation, and there's also an open mic session at the end. So everybody is coming to a large room. It's a lot of people in one room, and then the IESG or the IAB, they sit in front, and then you get an opportunity to discuss things, bring up some issues, ask some questions, and then they'll have to answer to the community. There's a hackathon, as Brian already mentioned, that's still going on today, and that's really grown into almost like a separate event at the IETF. It's very community-driven, and it's a great vibe. I don't know, has anybody participated in the hackathon here? Yay, one person in the back, great. Oh, that's another one, okay. So yeah, it's an amazing, experience, and I'm sure you two are already very tired by now because it's long days and nights. There are also things like code sprints, editing sessions, and there are a number of organized lunch sessions. For instance, this image here shows a sisters lunch. So that's a lunch organized for the women engineers participating in the IETF. It's also on the agenda. And there's a social event on Tuesday night. I encourage you, if there's still tickets, to participate. It's in the museum, and it's a good way to mingle informally with other participants. And there are other kind of non-organized events. There are a lot of hallway sessions, obviously. As Brian said, you'll always see kind of small groups of people in the hallways, debating about certain issues. There are little meetings, almost like mini BOFs, like in bars and other kind of side rooms. And there are also these editing sessions for internet drafts, like people kind of help each other to write their drafts. So there's a lot going on, and there's an app. If you haven't downloaded this, I recommend you to use the app. It's quite easy to use. And there's, of course, the agenda on the IETF site. It's actually on the data tracker site that we'll get back to later, but most of the material that once you're here, this is mostly the website that you will use, not IETF.org, but the data tracker.ietf.org. So working groups, let's get back to that. So that's really the place where most of the IETF work takes place. and either on the mailing list, so most of the work's actually on the mailing list, so you don't have to be here in person. And the face-to-face meetings here during the meetings are mostly used to discuss and solve some specific issues that maybe came up on the list, some loose ends in internet drafts that people want to clarify in the room by talking to other people in the room. All the sessions are streamed and recorded, and they are. Every working group has a charter and certain milestones and goals and deadlines. They're all visible on the working group chairs' web pages, and they're negotiated and checked by the area directors of their particular working group. And you see here on the picture, you see kind of a nice example of a working group. There's a remote participant presenting. Happens more and more often, actually. Seems to be working quite well here in the IETF, I think. There's a queue of people lining up in front of the mic, asking questions, a lot of people in the audience, and then there's the chair here, and the two chairs in front, kind of organizing the session. So that's how a working group typically looks like. And it's really a working group. It's not a conference, so it's really, but we'll get back to that, how this works. And then there are these things they call birds of a feather, BOF session. That's me presenting a BOF. A few years ago, we had a BOF about the educational activities that the IETF is organizing. And often, this one particular was not a working group forming BOF. So sometimes you see on the agenda, it's like a non-working group forming BOF. That basically means it's a one-time or a few times kind of a BOF session or a task force, almost like a task force meeting. But it's not meant to then become a working group with milestones and goals and document production and so forth. But often that's the way working groups are formed. So there's one or two BOFs, and then the people that came up with the idea, they present it, they just define the scope, they define some goals, and they get the feel in the room if that's something that a group of people want to work on and form a working group. It kind of fits, they have to see which area it fits into, then so the area directors are there and see if they get a good feel in the room, if that's something people want to work on. Sometimes it requires another meeting, so they want to be kind of be careful to create too many working groups. As I said, there are already 130 of them around. And so yeah, what's cut off there at the bottom? Is something, what's cut off there at the bottom? Some longer term topics may meet as a BOF. All right. Yeah, we made brand new slides for you, actually. It's the first time we're presenting them here live. So we had some webinars last week, and this is a new slide set. And so we're experimenting a little bit. Let's get back to some general meeting etiquette. As Brian said, this is quite a different experience here. And if you come to the meeting, like now, you come to your IETF meeting and you just think, well, let's just see what's going on, and you sit in a working group, you'll be very frustrated after a few minutes because people really dive right into the topics, right into the documents that are on the agenda. If you haven't read the documents before, you will be lost quite quickly. There are some sessions, as I mentioned earlier, that are a bit more high-level overview type sessions, like the area overviews, the plenary sessions. Maybe even some of the research working groups are a bit more, they have like more presentations rather than like issue-solving working group type of discussions. So I really recommend you to go and read documents and before you enter working group. And also pick your working groups kind of carefully. Don't think, oh, I want to follow these 10 working groups. There's a lot of work that you put on your shoulders. So choose carefully. Try to talk to as many people as you can. I hope you'll get to meet people here now today, also during the Newcomers session, and maybe later on in the mentoring sessions that you can come back to during the week and talk to each other, also talk to each other, the newcomers, of course, because it can be very overwhelming with I don't know how many people are here this week, but easily 1,200, 1,300 people during the week, so you'll lose each other easily. Remember to sleep. Yeah, what we basically mean is, as a newcomer, you want to get the most out of the meeting, and you fill your whole agenda, and you want to go to every single meeting slot, and you'll be very tired by after the second day. So make sure you take enough breaks. Maybe use some spare time also to just look on the website, find some documents that you're interested in, read them, talk to people, go have lunch, socialize with people, and kind of make your way into the community. Yeah, we put the last bullet on here, obviously, because it's a large community with a lot of different participants from different cultures, different countries. So please make sure you kind of treat each other respectfully and be nice to each other. A bit more specifically about the working group etiquette. So if you're at the working group, you already experienced this now here, speak directly, and there are always these microphones in the aisles of the rooms, and whenever you go to the microphone, please speak directly into the microphone. People will often say, "Eat the mic," and you have to come closer so that people can hear you. And also make sure you always say your name, because it's very important also for remote participation that people hear who's talking at the mic. And they don't see necessarily your badge. And so another thing is there are these blue sheets. They're like sign-up sheets. So they will be handed around in the room, so you can fill in your name. And that's kind of important also to find out how big is a group, and it's kind of a record of who participated in a certain working group. Listen to what other people have to say, but don't hesitate also to get up and ask a question, or maybe make a comment or a suggestion. If you have something to contribute, that's great. And there also, every working group has a Jabber, like a chat channel that you can use. That we have some information on that later on. Sometimes it's hard to kind of get into the queue, or kind of be a bit hesitant to get up into the mic and be exposed. You can also type your question into the chat room, and then the chat monitor has to read it out, so that makes it kind of a bit easier for you to participate at the beginning. A little side step here, there's what we mentioned earlier, the Internet Research Task Force. They're officially kind of under the IAB, so as you remember maybe on the picture, they were floating off on the side a bit. They weren't part of the actual IETF. And they're looking at more researchy type of topics. I can't remember what's currently, there's a human resource and protocols research group. There's a measurements research group. There used to be there's congestion control research group. There are a lot of kind of topics that are not quite IETF, not specific or defined enough. So they start as a research group. Sometimes they move into an IETF working group, or they collaborate a lot with working groups. And a lot of them meet during the week. So there's a lot of interaction and cross-fertilization between those two organizations. And there is an RFC that you can find out more about it. This picture here basically are two guys, I think they're from last time. There's always two presentations by some students that win an award once a year, and they get to present at the IETF. What else is there? Yeah, as I mentioned already, these area sessions. There's some pictures here of each of those. There's the plenaries, as I said here, with people sitting in front. They have to answer. This is the IESG open mic session, and then you get people asking questions, and that's quite a good idea to get an overview of what people are interested in. Hackathons, we mentioned, code sprints, the code lounge. I don't know much about that actually, but that's also a way to kind of work on implementations of ad hoc code sprint. All right, thank you. And there's a lot of opportunity for networking with each other, and a social event on Tuesday, as I said, and there's another picture of a sisters lunch. I really want to promote this, because there are not very many women at the IETF, and it's great to get together once a week at least to get to know each other a bit more. And this is a social in one of the earlier IETF, last IETF meetings, I think. And I think that's the end of this session. Are there any questions about this particular part?
Friso Veenstra. I have, as a preparation for this IETF meeting, been reading up on a number of proposals for RFCs. And one thing I was noticed, and I wonder about, is that in a number of RFCs I see these grammatical and text type of errors. Is it appreciated if you highlight those to the author, or is that something that, well, you shouldn't directly do during these sessions?
I'm sure the authors are appreciated if you point it out to them, maybe in the hallways. I don't know if the working group sessions, if there's enough time to point that out, but definitely if it's a clarification, or if the content isn't clear enough because there's some errors in the text, or the English isn't good enough, then it's certainly something that might be interesting also for others in the group, because then it adds to the understanding of the content. But at the end of all this process, of the documentation process, there's the RFC editor also comes into this. They will go through all the documents and make sure they have all the I's dotted and T's crossed. But is there anything else you want to add? You've been more involved in this process than I have.
Well, I'll add it from here. So a lot of it depends on whether you're talking about an internet draft or an RFC. So if you actually find errors in an RFC, there's what's called the errata process to actually report an error. And if that's the case, then you can file an errata report that says, I found these problems in the RFC. That will go to the authors and the working group, and they can discuss it. If it's in a document, if it's an internet draft that's being proposed in an RFC, then having those kinds of conversations with either the work group chairs or the document editors, or even raising them during a work group session if that document is being discussed, is very valuable and very much appreciated.
Yeah, please.
Okay, say my name first. Okay, my name is Neva. I have a small question about the agenda this afternoon for newcomers, and actually it was in the previous part, in the quick connection part, because in email it is said it is for the first 20 people who sign up, and I did register, but I have not get any confirmed information or emails about it. So I'm not sure if I'm in that 20 people or not.
Are you talking about the mentoring?
No, it's before the mentoring. It's the quick connection part.
Oh, the quick connections part. Yes, you're definitely in it. I just want to find out how many people are coming. So you're welcome to go to this room, and then you'll get to meet. You get to go through the quick connections experience, which is a bit like I don't know, we used to call it speed dating, but we didn't really like that term. So it's really like a few minutes, get to talk to one person, move over, get to talk to the next person. So yeah, definitely come.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. That's it. I think you were going to take over again?
All right, so this last section is more of an overview of the people, information, and tools that will probably help you out as you go through your IETF experience. So if you remember what I said earlier about don't get mixed up in the alphabet soup too early, most of these people fall into that alphabet soup, but the one that I'm going to highlight very, very brightly is the IETF Secretariat. And you'll see them, they're running around in these light blue shirts, and they've got little name tags that say IETF Secretariat. I will guarantee you, it does not matter if you've been here for 30 minutes or 30 years, they will bail you out of some problem. They are more than willing to help you with any question that you have. So if you run into problems and you can't find somebody that you know, find a Secretariat member, and they will get you in the right direction, because they are phenomenal. All these other people you probably won't have to deal with your first time around. They're probably people you're going to end up meeting with at some point in time if you're actually authoring a document and trying to get it published as an RFC. But they're critical to the operation of the IETF, and that's why they're listed here. Don't get too wrapped up in them right now, except the Secretariat. The other group of people that I would highly encourage you to engage with if you feel like there's a problem is the Ombuds team. This group of people were formulated 2 years ago, I believe, in order to deal with any kinds of harassment that might occur here. They are very valuable resources, and they do have little indicators on their badge that will tell you how to find them. But Allison, Pete, and Linda are very, very good at what they do.
And Linda is there in the background, so you can.
Oh, there's Linda.
There's a ribbon at the bottom.
Right.
Yes.
So feel free to engage with them if you feel like anybody is mistreating you or you think that you've seen harassment in any form or fashion. All right. So here's the fun part. Back to the alphabet soup. Badges running around. You'll see all sorts of different colors on them. This is roughly a good way to figure out who does what. I will say I've had 4 of those bad dots on at some point in time. And I'm also going to say that the only thing that means is that those people have volunteered to take on a responsibility. That doesn't mean that they're any more important than anybody else. They're here to get a job done, and feel free to engage them if you think they can help you do what it is that you're trying to accomplish. The goal here is basically just to make sure that they're easily recognized as you're going by them at 50 miles an hour in the hallway. Couple of links for everybody to kind of keep in their bookmarks so that they can track all this stuff as they go through the week. A lot of the tutorials that have been done at previous IETFs are available online, so you can go back and you can find information on all sorts of different technical talks that have been given during these Sunday sessions. The meeting wiki is kind of a catch-all to let people communicate different aspects of the meeting sessions. So you will see that there are, coordination sections on here. There's notices that need to go out. It's a good place to find, last-minute information if you need it. When you registered for the meeting, one of the little things there was a ticky box that said, put me on the meeting mailing list. That basically puts you on a mailing list for this meeting that allows people to share information that they found. So, how many people heard about the amber snow warning? Right? Yeah. I'm from North America, so the first time I saw the yellow snow warning, I was a little concerned. But you can very easily leave these lists too if you feel that the information isn't really applicable to you. There is the first-time attendees mailing list. I'm not on it, so I don't know how much traffic has been on it, but it's there for you to communicate, for information to be communicated to you. If you've come here and you have a spouse or a partner or whatever that came with you, there is a kind of informal coordination for those people to find other things to do while you're sitting in a working group session. But it's really meant to encourage kind of a meet and greet kind of environment for the spouses and partners who have come along with the people participating here. And as Miriam pointed out, there is the IETF Sisters Group, which is really designed to try and encourage the relationship between female members of the IETF. All right, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide because I'm going to make sure that you kind of understand where you can go find very, very detailed information about documents or work that you're interested in. So the IETF data tracker is pretty much a catch-all for the actual work group and document process within the IETF. It allows the work group chairs, document authors, ISG members to track what's going on with a particular document, and that's all documents. So you can find information about the history of a document. You can find out what state it's in. Has it been adopted by a working group? Is it being pushed to the ISG for publication? Is it at the RFC Editor getting ready to be published as an RFC? All that information is in the data tracker. It's organized generally by work groups. So if you kind of go along, if it's really visible here on this top picture, you'll see that there's a list of by area relationships. So whether it's if it's a applications related working group document, internet area related document, you can find it through that drop down. The key thing here is that if you're not sure what's going on with a document, there's also a search function to let you go find a particular document. So that means that even if a document hasn't been adopted by a working group, you can find information about it in the data tracker. So as you start writing documents, as you start reading documents, this is a good place to find all of the various history and state of those documents. The second page is what we refer to as the tools page. The tools page started as an informal collection of things that people have put together in order to kind of make their job of participating in the IETF easier. And we started pulling those together to where they could be shared. And so on the tools page, you can find a wealth of scripts, programs, templates, what have you, for writing a document, verifying documents. So if you're writing a management information base for an SNMP technique, there are actually SNMP validation tools that will basically compile your MIB and make sure that it's formulated the correct way. If you're writing formal language specifications in ABNF, there is an ABNF validator that works there. There are templates for writing drafts in different formats. If you want to write in XML, there's an XML template. If you want to write in NROF, there's an NROF template. If you want to write in Word, there's a Word template. All this stuff resides on the tools page. So before you go and write your own little script or tool to do something, go look here first, because there's a good chance that somebody else has already written something that's either does what you want or is really, really close and could be like an 80% start for what you're trying to do. But these 2 pages in and of themselves are very good references as you're trying to deal with IETF documents. It gives you all the information that you need and all the tools that you need in order to deal with them. All right, and I'm going to let Miriam finish up here. Any questions on those areas before I go hide behind the table?
Hi. Sorry, my name is Abdikarim. I want to ask 2 questions, which is probably on some things you've touched before. Oh, sorry, I want to ask 2 questions on things you've touched before. Well, the first one is, if you find somebody that you want to meet, the best way to approach them, is it to first of all email them in advance, or you just approach them when you see them in the room? And the second one is, how do you deal with the red neck tag? If you take a picture and you find somebody who is having like the red neck tag in the picture, what do you do with that? Thank you.
Oh, so the white and red lanyards, is that?
No, I think the red one says, "Do not take a picture of me."
Right. Right. So the red lanyard is an experiment for this IETF. You just like the color.
I just picked the best color, yeah.
Right. It's an experiment to deal with, there are groups of people that aren't necessarily all that excited about having their picture taken. And so what the ISG did is they came up with an experiment with different lanyard colors, so it would be relatively easy for someone who wanted to take a picture to see that there might be people who don't want their picture taken, and they're supposed to avoid them at all costs, at least from an up-close perspective. If someone's taking a picture of an entire group, the chances of them being able to avoid all the red lanyards is pretty hard. But it's an experiment to see if it helps people's concerns over getting their picture taken. To your first question about how do you actually introduce yourselves, for the most part, I think part of it is really going to be up to what you feel comfortable with. Most people in the IETF have no problems going up and introducing themselves and saying, hey, I have a question, or hey, I'd like to talk to you about this. The one thing I will caution against doing is expecting to have an in-depth conversation on a first meeting like that, because you may not necessarily know what their time constraints are. There are people that are literally running from meeting to meeting here, so at least introducing yourself, saying what you want to talk about, and trying to arrange a time where it's convenient for both of you to talk is probably the best way to do it. And whether that's in person or via email is really up to you. I'm sure there are some people who don't work that way, but most of the people I know are comfortable in either mode of introduction. Right?
Well, as you could see on the slides, I am quite comfortable having a picture taken and putting on the slide, so I better change my lanyard. I had no idea this was, I saw the discussion, but of course when I picked the lanyard I had forgotten about it. Anyway, to finish this off, there's, you all here now, of course, you're not maybe so interested in the remote participation, but maybe you're not able to come to each and every IETF meeting from now on. So there's a very good remote participation interface developed by these guys from Meet Echo, and they're all here on the slide, and they're running around, you'll see them, and they're responsible for the whole system, like the audio, the streaming, and also when you log in, you see an interface, and you know how to pick which working group, and participate in the chat channel, and so forth. So Meet Echo is the term, and there's a whole website and explaining how to do remote participation for maybe next time. There's a network, obviously, during the whole week. It started yesterday already, I think, or even before, that you can log in. It's running, it's accessible through most of the hotel as well. So it's IETF and IETF Hotel, I believe. There's, as I said here, the secure networks use IETF with password IETF, but there's also an open IETF Hotel network that you can use. And it runs until the end of the week, to the end of Friday, I believe. And there's a terminal room. It's still called terminal room, even though there are actually no terminals in there anymore. It's just kind of an historic term that we still use. But there are printers, and there are like wired connections you can use, and there are usually also people that can help you to figure out, I don't know, if you want to print something, or some other people have experience in how to find something on the data tracker and so forth. And then last but not least, as we mentioned before, the chat rooms, the Jabber channels. Every working group has one. There is we use XMPP as a protocol, underlying protocol for that. You can join, you can watch what other people are saying in the background of the working, during the working groups. They're all open. Everybody can see everything you type in there. I mean, everybody who's in the room, obviously. You can ask a question, as I said earlier on, or comment on something that's been discussed in the room. I think that's it. So above all, don't be too overwhelmed. There was a lot of information. Make sure you enjoy yourselves and you have fun and you learn a lot and get to meet a lot of people. And please don't hesitate to come find us, or go, as Brian said, to the registration desk to find the staff of the Secretariat, and they're very helpful. So if there are any questions, I think we have some time, some spare time here. There's also a survey that we would like you to fill in if you have a moment, so that we can work on these slides and improve them for next time, and maybe something that you think is missing. Sure, go ahead.
This is Yang Bo. I just have a very quick question. As you mentioned, there is a blue sheet for each attendees of the meeting. But where can I find it for the blue sheet?
Oh, they're not. We don't have blue sheets here at the moment for the newcomer, for the tutorials. But every working group, well, the working group chairs are responsible for it. So the Secretariat gives the working group chairs like what's it called? Like a under.
So as the working group session starts, the work group chairs will pass around clipboards with the blue sheets on it, and you'll sign that as it passes around the room.
So if I understand it correctly, it's a paper. It's not a website URL, right?
For the people in the meeting session, it's paper. For people who are participating remotely, it gets logged by the Meet Echo software.
So it's a little tick box in the Meet Echo for remote participation, yes.
Thank you.
Hello.
I think you can move that, yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Nasraddin Suleiman from Ethiopia, and I'm Internet Society Fellow. And my question is not exactly related to what you have said, but since this IETF awareness has to be created widely, are there any organizations like Internet Society which gives this fellowship? Like, because in developing countries, or mainly in our country, there are not that much awareness on this IETF, and participating in this kind of thing may give a lot to work. And I'm working on a project which incorporates the IETF documents on the curriculum at Addis Ababa University. But to do that, we need more individuals to participate in that. But still, it requires some training or some kind of participation. So are there any organizations beside Internet Society which gives this kind of fellowship?
I believe there are some other related activities, such as the remote hubs that some individuals have set up, I think also with the help of the Internet Society, where people in other countries can kind of follow the IETF meetings and participate that way. I'm not aware of other fellowships such as the ISOC fellowship at the moment. No, sorry.
It would be better if we have that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes, one more.
Hi, Sal from the US. Is there any policy for sharing the document or the content of the discussions? There is any level of confidentiality? Or when we discuss draft, whatever information is always public?
Yeah, once it's published as an internet draft, it's public and everybody can read it, yes. And that's the way to share it through the data tracker, as Brian showed earlier. Yeah. Anything else? Have you answered all your open questions? Are you all prepared to dive into this full week? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Thanks for your participation. Oh, you don't have a question, no? You just, okay, sorry. And good luck.